Mr. President and fellows, it's a great pleasure to introduce the Reverend David Tudor from Barbados by birth. He's a Rotarian from Canvey Island, and the subject is going to be extremely interesting. So without further ado, I please present to you the Reverend David Tudor.
I don't think I need the microphone. Do you think I do? Let me know if you think I do. I'm not here strictly sort of from Canvey Island Rotary Club. I would bring greetings from the President, Colin McLean, if he knew I was here. But he doesn't, but I'm happy to take greetings back from you when we meet next Tuesday evening. I am the Sergeant at Arms, as explained to my colleagues on this table, and I fine people for misbehaviour. Certainly, by my calculations so far, I would have made about 20 quid from this disreputable gathering, really. But matter. So I've not come from Barbados today. I've come from Canvey Island, which is quite similar. They're both islands. And when the bishop said, I want you to look at Canvey Island, I thought, well, lead on. I can do islands. I come from one. I can do this. And there are similarities. More of that anon. Barbados, anybody been before I start telling lies? You say, oh my word. Gosh. Yes, I know you have. We talked about you. And where did you stay or just cruise? So popped in for a half a day or something.
Yeah, we went on a tour around the island.
Yeah, and anybody stayed there?
No. 5, 7 days.
Where did you stay? Do you remember?
He said Captain something hotel. I can't remember exactly.
Okay.
It's by the seaside. Somewhere.
Yeah, more seaside. That's easy enough. It's surrounded by water.
Sam Lord's Castle.
Sam Lord's Castle.
That's where I stayed too. Sam Lord's. Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
Gentlemen and lady, we have people of substance here. Whoa, Sam Lord's Castle. Depends on what year you stayed there. It's closed and derelict. But until a few years ago, it was absolutely the place to stay.
Yeah.
And then it sort of fell on bad times, and they started letting anybody in. And now it's closed, as I say. And it was bought by a consortium who were hoping to rebuild and restore it to its former glory, and then, funnily enough, it burned down last year. Interesting. What a coincidence. What a coincidence that was. But anyway, so it's 21 miles long and 14 miles wide. And my title of my topic, if it has a title, if it's rambling, is Barbados, Slave or Free. So 21 miles long, 14 miles wide, exactly the same size as the Isle of Wight. Different shape, but same number of square miles, 166 square miles. And it nestles where the Caribbean meets the Atlantic. So on the left-hand side, the west coast, you have the Caribbean, very calm, gentle, balmy, beautiful. On the east coast, you have the Atlantic, rough waters, breakers, rock, coarser sand, and so on. And the temperature is 80 degrees. Always.
A bit like Canvey Island.
Much the same. That would be another pound. 21. So the one thing we do not discuss in Barbados is the weather. And when I came to England, we were just calculating 39 years ago to university when I was 18. I just pause while you calculate that. Give you a bit of room to say, gosh, wouldn't have thought so. When I came 39 years ago, I couldn't understand why the English are obsessed with the weather. And you always discuss it. I now know, because you have 4 seasons in the same day, I understand that. I have a suspicion that you use weather to avoid conversation.
Yes.
Am I warm?
That's
you know,
right,
you see somebody coming, you don't quite know what to say. Chilly today, yes. And the moment has passed. You don't have to engage. But we don't do that in Barbados, because if you did, it would be very, very boring. Warm today? Yeah. It's quite warm yesterday. You're going out tomorrow? Yes, probably be warm. You know, we don't do that. We don't do that. Original inhabitants, not sure. We think the Barrancoid Indians. Not heard of them. South America nipped down for a while, went off, Barrancoid. Then came the Arawaks, and they left a few tools and flints about the place. And then came the Caribs, as in Caribbean, Oh, it's all making sense now. Now, the Caribs were cannibals, so they ate the Arawaks. and then they kind of ate each other, really, which is quite short-sighted. Because you're going to run out of meals. It's a whole new meaning to meal for one, you know, me or you. Anyway, and so they died out, not surprisingly. And then in 1400, the Portuguese came, because they were bored at home before the English got bored at home, and were looking around to see what else there was in the world. And they arrived and saw the Coral Island, and these huge trees with roots coming down from the branches. And they call them Los Barbados, the bearded ones, and gave the name to that bit of Coral Island where the Atlantic meets the Caribbean, Los Barbados. And you know, those who stayed at Sam Lord's Castle in its heyday would go on holiday to the Barbados. The rest of us go to Barbados, okay? The Barbados, very posh. But it didn't suit their purpose. I don't know what their purpose was, but it didn't suit. So they left the name and a couple of pigs and went back home. The English arrived in 1627, captained by Captain Powell, William Courtine Brothers, found the name Los Barbados, the Barbados, and thought it suited them perfectly for sugar, tobacco, and cotton. They found the trees. They found a heck of a lot of pigs. It was 227 years, after all, not a lot, you know, not a lot else to do. And they put up a flag and sent an email or whatever to the king saying, got you another bit of rock, really? Which is how you did things, found somewhere where nobody seemed to be in, and thought that's a bit more of the British Empire. Sugar, tobacco, and cotton. Perfect conditions. Temperature absolutely balmy. So you start planting your sugar, your tobacco, your cotton, and life is good, except that in paradise there's always that serpent, malaria, yellow fever, dysentery, typhoid, and your constitution is not equal to it, so you're keeling over in the temperature with the... And you didn't realize that malaria was caused by mosquitoes. You thought it was the air, which is why it's called malaria. It was bad air. And not realizing these little midges that you were swiping away were actually killing you. And so, you know, people, particularly with childbirth, a woman would have 2, 3, 4 children and then succumb. And he would come back to England, get another wife, bring her back, have 3, 4, 5, 6 children. She would succumb. You come back for another wife. Sometimes you would come with a spare. So you would have the funeral in the morning and the wedding in the afternoon. And on we go. And they're all recorded on the tablets in the cathedral and so on. You can trace the family trees and the average age of death and so on. But then you hear of indentured labor. So you can bring some servants over. They contract to work on your plantation for 7 years. And then they get a bit of land themselves and their freedom. But of course they're English too, so they're succumbing to the temperature and the diseases. And then you hit upon the idea of transportation to get rid of your undesirables from here and send them to Barbados. And when Michael Howard was Home Secretary, he would have loved that option. Kind of like a dustbin, really. Just chuck them into the bin. And the reasons for transportation weren't particularly severe. I mean, one of them I read in the records was loitering Tooley Street, Southwark, with no good purpose.
Yeah.
Over the head, on a ship, wakes up in Barbados. Can you imagine when he got back home? 7 years later, where have you been? I just sent you for the milk. You know what I mean? Well, I've been in Barbados. Don't you lie to me. Anyway, so and then, of course, because again, they're succumbing to the elements, and then you hear that if you get in your ship and go across the sea in a straight line, you're going to come to Africa. And there they are selling units of labor. It's not people. Units of labor who will not succumb to the conditions, who will do what you tell them, and will work for years. So you nip across your ship, you fill up with these units of labor, you bring them back, and the English slave trade is born. Other countries were at it for years, but the British slave trade starts in 17th century. And if you go across in your ship and you lay some of them that way, and another lot that way, and a third lot that way, you get 3 lots of units of labor for the same price of the voyage. Okay, some of them are going to die, but it doesn't matter. You chuck them overboard because it doesn't matter. These are not people. You couldn't do it if there were people. These are units of labor. And very soon there are more slaves than there are slave owners. They're all baptized. Curious, they're not people, but we baptize them. And we can't handle the African names, so they're all called Peter and Mary and Elizabeth and John and whatever. And that situation obtains, and now you've got your big English families, and the first son would follow dad into the family business, managing half of Berkshire or whatever. The second son goes into the army or the navy. Third son, not very bright. Put him in the church. That's another pound. Fourth son, bit of a worry to his mum. Don't know what to do with him, bit of a trouble. Send him to manage the estates in Barbados. And he goes, he sorts it out, he appoints his own manager, comes back to England and spends the rest of his life counting the money. Which of the four sons did materially best? The fourth son, laughing. And if you've been to Kennington or to Liverpool or to Bristol, you will see the houses, the townhouses of the sugar planters. Fabulous wealth. Fabulous, fabulous wealth. Indeed, I don't know if you know the A23, it goes through Brixton and it goes around St Matthew's Church in Brixton, southwest London. And it's a massive church. It's now a community centre with a small chapel. And when they were making it into a community centre, they had to exhume the bodies from the crypt, because you can't be playing ping pong over graves. They fell. So they were digging up these people, and they were having a little rest by the gateway, a few years ago now, having a rest by the gateway, and a Rastafarian Jamaican passes by and says, "Is what you doing?" They were just digging up some bodies. Whose bodies these are? These are the bodies of the 17th century Caribbean slave owners. Hang on a minute, I come and help you. Vengeance is mine. And the digging was carried on with renewed vigor. And that situation of slavery carried on right on until 18 early. And you have your William Wilberforce, but more importantly you have your Quakers, your Bourneville family, the Cadburys, who thought this is fundamentally wrong. And rumours were coming out of the Caribbean, not that we were doing these savages a favour, but that there was horrendous cruelty and privation in these conditions on the plantations. But of course, who is sitting in Parliament? The plantation owners, because they've come back, got themselves a bit of money, got themselves elected, they're sitting very nicely. So William Wilberforce trying to persuade Parliament to abolish slave trade was like getting turkeys to vote for Christmas. They're not going to do it. But eventually they did, and slave trade was abolished in 1807, but slavery carried on, different islands, different times. Barbados was 1833, 1834. And there was rejoicing. There was celebration. It was marvelous. And we were free. Free to do what exactly? Free to go where? We had been there for 200 years. And Africa is now very embarrassed because they sold. And England is very embarrassed. So the slaves could take the surname of their owners. God bless. That's a pound. The slaves could take the surnames of their owners and work for their former owners. And the rights were a bit better, a bit safer than they had been, although still some stories of cruelty and privation. So it makes for interesting family trees, because most people are now mixed race in Barbados. Some would pretend to be entirely white and belong to the yacht club. That's their problem. Some will pretend to be entirely black, but most are mixed race because, so my family, the Tudors, the slaves took the surname of their owner. So you have black Tudors. My ancestor, Joseph Tudor, was a slave owner who had 4 children from Laura, a freed black woman, without benefit of clergy, if you get my drift. Yes. So 4 children, so they're brown, and then Joseph's brothers and sisters carried on marrying white people. So you have your white Tudors, your black Tudors, ex-slaves, and your brown ones. That's my lot. And it's winter now, and I'm a little pale. But when I go home, in August I go home for my respray, as I call it. And the parish. It's lovely when you come back to Canvey Island because I go very, very dark indeed. We were there for like 3 weeks in August, and nobody quite knows what to say to you. They say, "God, you're black. You look so well." lest they cause a situation, a little racial incident. But it's interesting, and my children, because my wife is not Barbadian. My wife comes from Junction 8 on the M25. It's Reigate, they call it, but it's Junction 8, basically, on the M25. And so she's white English. But my children, three boys, look to all intents and purposes white. And the third one has red hair, which raised an eyebrow in the parish when he showed up, let me tell you. But it's mine. My English, my mum was English as well. She came from Shepherd's Bush, but she said it was Fulham. So she was English as well. And it was her grandmother who had bright red hair. So it's my lot, not my wife's lot, who have red hair. But I say my wife did get interrogated when Samuel showed up. But I wonder, because my sons have inherited black characteristics that you can't see. Now, in my family, there is an eye cancer called retinoblastoma. Yeah. And it affects children. They're born with it, or you develop the eye cancer by the time you're 5. My grandmother had her eye removed on the dining room table in 1900. Her son, my uncle, had his eye removed, same dining room table, in 1930. 2 of his children in the 1960s were treated. Of course, it spread to the other eye, and then it killed both the children. So the protocol now is the eye comes out. So when my first child was due, I thought, better check this out. I should be tested to see if I'm carrying the dodgy chromosome, and he can be tested when he's born to see if he's carrying it. So we went to Guy's, and at Guy's you have Mr. Hungerford. Now Mr. Hungerford is your eye man. He's up there. There's God, there's Mr. Hungerford. Yeah. Oh, I think sometimes he thinks it's Mr. Hungerford. All right, so I'm ushered into his presence, and I guess you've had eye tests. Some of you are wearing glasses, I hope you have. And you're ushered, and it's a little darkened room, and you have this little, you rest your chin, and then they point little thing. It's slightly uncomfortable, isn't it? And no, I have, and my son, my first son, had enlarged tubes behind the eye. Now, there are 2 reasons for enlarged tubes. Either you have glaucoma, or you have Negro ancestry. So, picture the scene. I'm in his presence, Mr. Hungerford's, not God's. And he goes quiet. Now, it's never good when consultants go quiet. You're talking to me! You know when he goes quiet, he says, He says, any history of glaucoma? I said, no, I don't think so. Any Negro ancestry? I said, if you like to put on your big light and have a look. So he flicks his spit out and says, oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, right, So it raises a question for me. How many people in England who look white and are white are being treated for glaucoma who don't have glaucoma, but great-great-great-granddaddy was black? I just, I'm right to David Cameron. He might find the savings he's looking for in the health service. You might do. I don't know. But I just raised the question, how much do we inherit from people we no longer know? I mean, by show of, I won't embarrass you by asking about your parents, just in case you don't know them. But your grandparents, how many of you, by show of hands please, know the names, if you think about it and look them up at home, of all 4 grandparents? Show of hands please? Yeah. Not every hand is going up already. Wow. All 8 great-grandparents? My word. All 16 great-great? No, already. We've all gone. How quickly we lose track. And if there's one illegitimacy there, then that whole wedge of family tree is close to us. So had my children been fostered or adopted, and God knows sometimes I wish they were, then, and they grew up in a different family, in a different country, there wouldn't be that knowledge of the Negro ancestry, because you can't tell by looking at them, certainly the red-headed one. Interesting. And it was so exciting when my first child was going to be born, because we didn't know what color he might come out. And my parents-in-law from Reigate in Surrey, in Junction 8 could well have, been welcoming a very black grandchild. Because you could throw back to any gender. So I thought when he was born, we wouldn't send the standard card, colour of eyes, born at 322. I thought we could send a colour swatch. What do you think? But my wife wouldn't let me. She's kind of no fun. Anyway, he's a well-adjusted 17-year-old and stuff, and he's good. He hasn't done him any harm at all. But it does mean that most people, as I say, are mixed race, and it does make for mainly harmonious race relations, because there's no point chucking bricks at each other because you're chucking them at your own granny. So we haven't had the Brick Lane riots, you have had the Bristol, the Toxteth riots, fairly peaceable. And then, then in the 1950s, the British government came to Barbados and said, we need you. British Rail, London Transport, National Health Service. And you're British. You have your passports. Come. Britain needs you. And they packed their bags. And they came with great excitement and joy. And they landed. And the welcome, less than warm. Less than warm. I remember going through Ellis Island at New York and seeing some of the quotations from the immigrants. One of them that resonated with me, it said, before we came to New York, we thought the streets were paved with gold. When we arrived, we discovered two things. They were not paved, and we were expected to pave them. Ouch. And these are working class, middle class people, educated, who arrived ready to make a contribution. They came to the churches, because we always go to church in Barbados, so they came to church and were told by wardens there must be some mistake. I think your church is around the corner. You didn't mean to come here, surely. Ouch. They would see a vacancy sign, and by the time they got up the few steps, the vacancy sign had been turned around. No Irish, no dogs, no blacks. If you haven't read Andrea Levy's book, Small Island, please do. Not of large volume. BBC didn't add adaptation, didn't like the adaptation. I didn't like it at all. But the book is stunningly moving, tracing a Jamaican couple settling in England and the privations and the abuse and the sheer awfulness with which they were treated. 50 years later, 60 years later, they're now retiring, that generation. Have a problem, what to do? Where's home? Barbados has changed. I've changed. So I have a choice. Do I get old and cold? Or do I go back home, which I might not recognize anymore, it might not recognize me, and it means leaving my children, my grandchildren, and my great-grandchildren, who think England is home, and have Manchester accents, Birmingham accents, South East London accents, whatever. And Barbados is a place for holidays, not home in any real way to them. So it's a dilemma. How do I leave my family? But how do I stay here? And it's difficult. And of course they're seeing increasingly their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, bleeding to death on the pavements of the cities because of the gang culture, the drug culture, the not belonging culture. They'll still be asked, where are you from? Manchester. No, really, where are you from? Manchester. No, my parents? Yeah, Manchester. Grandparents? They came from Barbados. And that dislocation of identity is hard to swallow, really. And then, of course, in the 1970s, the blessed Ted Heath joined the Common Market and said to the Barbadians, thank you so much, we've had your sugar for 300 years. Lovely, thanks awfully. Don't need it anymore. And the whole culture, the whole economy was based on that. And so they've had to change, and sadly, in my view, it's now 95% dependent on tourism. 95%. And tourists are fickle. We want something unspoiled, but we want the facilities. So we must have louvres, we must have flush, we must have nice meals, we must have nice kitchens, we must have lovely sanitation, we must have lovely hotel rooms. It's not unspoiled anymore. Let's go and find somewhere unspoiled. It's difficult. Difficult. Education system. We've always been frightfully English, because some of the other islands have been Spanish or French. Barbados has always been English. So in the middle of Barbados, in Bridgetown, Trafalgar Square. And in the middle of Trafalgar Square, Nelson's column, which went up before yours. 9 years before yours, in case you're thinking who copied whom. Okay? Come out of Trafalgar Square, into Worthing, into Hastings, turn left into the Scotland district. It's all frightfully English. And a bit like aging tree trunks, you can tell when the royal family visited. Because all the boys that year are called Philip. They're all called Charles, or Andrew, or Edward, or even Fergie for a while. She lost her cred. Elizabeth, Margaret was always with us, Princess Margaret, and we loved her. Very, very, very loyal. You see, when Edward VIII, abdicated, we sang carols. Hark the herald angels sing, Mrs. Simpson's pinched our king. We weren't happy. 5,000 miles away, we were not happy. Not happy at all. But we love Princess Margaret. We think she was dealt a bad deal. Had she been allowed to marry Group Captain Townsend, her life would have been so different. And her uncle Oliver Messel had a place in Barbados on the west coast. And she was always there. And I served her drinks. I was a scout, and I served this lady's drink. And she said, "Thank you." Oh,
Thank you.
hello, Mom, Princess Margaret. Hi there. And how sad it was that one of the last public pictures of her is at her mother's 101st birthday, when she was wheeled out, legs bandaged, dark glasses, arm in a sling. Who advised? Who allowed that to happen? She was stunningly beautiful. We remember when she married Anthony Armstrong-Jones, that veil flying back, stunning beautiful. And there she was, looking awful. That should not have been allowed. But hold on. So we do like our royal family. We would always wave when the Queen passed by in her silver shadow Rolls Royce belonging to the Governor General. And not sure who that little white lady is, but we'd wave and stuff. And my grandmother had in her hallway had a huge picture with Winston, Leonard, Spencer, Churchill. Frightfully patriotic. And very religious. Very religious. You remember how big the island is? 21 miles by 14. How many Christian denominations do you think there are? You're Anglican, you're Roman Catholic, you're Methodist. 147 different Christian denominations. Not talking Sikh and Muslim and Hindu and Jew, Christian denominations. Very religious. And I'll come back to that in a minute. The education, very English. I studied Shakespeare, of course, and Chaucer. On the same day, students in England were taking the papers, I was taking my Oxford and Cambridge O-levels and A-levels. And we studied Thomas Hardy. He is miserable. He is miserable. Jane Austen, where nothing much happens. And then you've got the whole Barbadian culture outside your window, your classroom window. You can hear the steel bands, you can see the dancing in the street, and we are reading Jane Austen's Emma. It may be a while since you have read Jane Austen's Emma. Let me remind you of the very first sentence in it. This is just the first sentence to the first full stop. Are you ready? Emma Jane Woodhouse, handsome, clever, and rich, with a comfortable home and a happy disposition, seemed to unite some of the best blessings of existence, and had lived nearly 21 years in this life with very little to distress or vex her. Are you still with me? You know what I mean? Nothing much happens. And Mr. Woodhouse thought a basin of thin gruel was not altogether unwholesome. Oh, for heaven's sake. After I left in 1974, at the age of 18, did I mention, they changed the syllabus. You still have your Shakespeare, your Chaucer, but you also have Caribbean culture, Caribbean dialect, because we speak very, very fast, and each island has a different accent. Probably because the slaves were not taught English, so they copied what they heard. And when you copy what you hear, you copy it slightly differently. Also, it didn't suit the slave owner to teach the different tribes the same language, because they could then plot and rebel together. There's more of them than there were of the slave owner. So, frightfully different accents. I mean, you know, we speak very fast. If he wanted me to say, what do you want me to say? It comes out as, we want me say. It's all there. What you want me say. We want me say. And then because we don't finish the words, you move on to the next thing. And we don't stop talking just because somebody has started talking. But at the Horn Church and Upminster Rotary Club. You just carry on. Just carry on talking. And my wife, who's been coming now for 23, 24 years, can still get lost in a crowded room of Barbadians. What's happening? Just smile there. It's fine. It's okay. Just say yes. So, the English, the syllabus, the religion, very religious. And why is it so religious? And I have a theory about that, and I think you know in your own life, when something goes wrong, when it's been a disappointment, a bereavement, a failure of some sort, you know you have a choice. You can't let it break you. You can't say, that's happened, my life is over, no point carrying on. Or you can say, this has happened, I wished it hadn't, but I choose to continue to look up and laugh and love and live. And I think Barbados as a whole and the Caribbean generally has said, yes, we were enslaved for 200 years, but we will not let that define us. That has happened. It has made us who we are, and we choose to look up and laugh and love and live. I think we have to finish. Thank you.
Before I ask Jim to follow that, which he's going to try very hard to, any questions? Right.
Yes.
Did I detect a slight Irish note somewhere?
We were discussing this over here. David was saying earlier that when he came to Barbados, he thought it was Irish. And I didn't know what people meant by that. I thought, I don't sound like Ian Paisley. But that's the other lot. That's Northern Ireland. And then I met someone from Cork in Southern Ireland. And it was amazing. And it's total, as far as we are aware, total coincidence. It's the way that you say R. The letter R. And because R occurs in so many words, it's that lilt. It's that music. And I kept asking that person from Cork, say that again. Say it again. That's how I would say it. And it's quite amazing. And so I tend to begin weddings and christenings by saying, I am from Barbados. In the name of the Father and of the Son. Otherwise people spend the whole service trying to work out your accent. And they don't listen to a damn thing you're telling them. And at the end, instead of saying lovely service vicar, they say, can you settle an argument? Because she thinks you're from Ireland. And I think you're from Canada. And I think, when were they having this argument? During the vows? What? You know? I can't do it at funerals, sadly, because they're a bit more serious. But yeah, it perplexes people. Yeah. Perplexes.
Any other questions?
Yeah, that's good.
Oh, Jim, follow that.
No.
Well, I had to be a little bit careful because I don't really want him to find me again.
No, so far, they're all virtual finds. Your this club doesn't do finding.
I have to say, this is one of the best talks I think I've heard. My impression of Barbados, you come from a lovely island, slightly better in my opinion than Canvey Island.
Marginally.
Yeah, marginally. Yeah. But I have to say one thing, as you say, it's one of the English islands is the wrong phrase to use, but you understand what I mean. If you go to some of the American islands, they're much better. They're much tidier, they're much cleaner, there's much more investment in them.
Yes.
My impression of the British islands that I saw, we didn't do you very good. We didn't look after it very well, did we?
It took quite a lot.
Yes, that's right. I think it was a one-way traffic in the wrong direction. The basic tenet of your speech was, of course, about slavery, and that is, in my opinion, one of the major blots on the many blots of the British Empire. You talk about the immigration into this country, or the Windrush. My generation will remember that, and we are all aware of the problems that the immigrants had. Terrible. I like to think we are all here more enlightened. I think we all thoroughly enjoyed what we have heard today. And I'd like you all to join me in congratulating our speaker.
find us. The apologies book, please.